Good morning, good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to this webinar brought to you by the IOSH Offshore Group on the topic of incident scene management. Sadly, in these very challenging times, discovering acts of criminality or even tragedy in our workplace is a distinct possibility. Therefore, being equipped to preserve and protect any incident scene will certainly assist in any potential investigation that may be undertaken by the authorities. Therefore, the objective or learning outcome of this webinar is to provide you all with basic overview and understanding of the key requirements of evidence protection and scene security that is applicable wherever you may be in the world. So on behalf of the IOSH Group Committee, all its members and supporters, it gives me great and immense pleasure to introduce to you Len Braun from Police Scotland. Good afternoon and morning to you, after you, Len.
Good afternoon. In today's webinar, I hope to provide you with some basic information about securing evidence in the event of an incident occurring in the offshore environment. I will try to put this into some context by explaining the roles of the police and partner agencies, whilst considering your expectations of the police role and perhaps the police's expectations of you, and how you respond to an incident. It will not qualify you, however, to don a white crime suit or blue shoe covers. So here we go with the presentation. We will look at 4 specific areas: people, substances, weapons, and fatalities which occasionally happen. I appreciate that the audience is worldwide. The information I'm going to provide you is UK based, but should be transferable into where you are in the world. The powers of police forces in the UK extend to the outer limits of our territorial seas. So in other words, the old 12-mile limit. Section 10 of the Petroleum Act 1998 relates to the application of UK criminal law to 500-metre zones around oil and gas installations. And the Criminal Justice Offshore Activities Order 1987 transfers the policing powers to these 500-metre zones. Section 85 of the Energy Act 2004 relates to the application of the UK criminal law to renewable energy installations, etc. And the Criminal Jurisdiction Application to Offshore Renewable Energy Installations, etc. Order 2009 transfers policing powers to the areas designated by Section 85. The Petroleum Act 1998, Section 11 relates to the application of UK civil law to the territorial seas and the relevant areas of the UK continental shelf. The Energy Act 2004, Section 87 likewise relates to the application of UK civil law to the territorial seas and the relevant areas of the UK renewable energy zone. The laws relating to evidence are complex, and it is the responsibility of the police to ensure that correct procedures are followed. Nevertheless, there may be occasions when the police do not attend offshore, and ensuring a chain of actions is important. If the police are to attend offshore, unnecessary handling of evidence should be avoided, and where practical, items should be left where they are until the arrival of the police. Correct labelling and packaging of evidence as part of the police investigation is the responsibility of the police. You should consider that suspects are innocent until their guilt is proven. When the police are to attend the operator's installation or vessel, you or the vessel master should liaise with the onshore team. The police have the responsibility of identifying and interviewing suspects as part of the police investigation. If you believe there to be an obvious suspect, it may be prudent to ask that person to agree to remain separate from the rest of the workforce and to agree to be accompanied by at least 2 people. This is to help ensure that evidence is not tampered with or destroyed, whilst ensuring the safety of those accompanying the suspect. The police may ask for any vessel to return to port. The police are responsible for interviewing witnesses as part of the police investigation. Company interviews may be carried out at the request of the onshore team to establish the facts or whether the incident is serious enough to request the police to attend offshore. These will, however, be the property of the operator. No action should be taken without instruction from the onshore team, and any company interview should be conducted in the presence of another person not involved in the incident. Try and make a list of personnel who may have witnessed the incident, either directly or indirectly. It should be noted that the identification of all relative witnesses as a police investigation is the responsibility of the police, and any list of witnesses you may compile would be for the primary purpose of supporting your company's internal investigation. However, the police may request it be handed over to them on a voluntary basis, or they may take possession of it on production of an appropriate search warrant. It is good practice to suggest to potential witnesses that they do not discuss what they witnessed, as any discussion amongst them could result in statements which include speculation and a mixture of what the witness actually saw and what others saw. You could suggest to potential witnesses that they may wish to write down their version of the events while it remains fresh in their minds, although you cannot insist upon such action. Please note this record of events will belong to the individual concerned and will be for their reference going forward. If your company wishes to keep copies of these records, then this should be made clear to the individuals concerned prior to the record being made. In addition, the police may request such records be handed over to them on a voluntary basis, or they may take possession of it on production of an appropriate search warrant. Masters of vessels may wish to consider additional legislation for incidents offshore. If a person with the consent of the master or if any other person authorised to give it goes to sea or attempts to go to sea in a United Kingdom ship, he shall be liable on summary conviction to a fine. And that's under the Merchant Shipping Act 1995. Similarly, Section 105 of that Act relates to the master's power of arrest on a UK Kingdom ship. Similar legislation, I suspect, will apply in other countries around the world as they are subject to kind of the Convention of the Laws of the Sea. We also recommend that companies have some form of basic incident recording kit should there be an incident offshore. And these are a few of the items that you should consider putting into your kits. An incident logbook, pens and marker pens, labels and tags, rolls of barrier tape, disposable surgical gloves, a large pair of scissors, plastic bags with seal for the storage of drugs, paper bags and cardboard boxes of various sizes for storage of evidential items such as weapons, clothing, etc. And if the incident occurs outside, a cover sheet for protection from any weather conditions. First, we'll look at people. 2 incidents were brought to my attention recently. The first one here on the left is the 18th of November, when 72 people were arrested aboard a fishing vessel off the coast of East Anglia in England. And the one on the right, when 7 men were detained by special forces on the 25th of October on board an oil tanker off the Isle of Wight. So to explain some of our partner agencies round about people issues, the National Crime Agency in the UK leads the UK fight to cut serious and organised crime, protecting the public by targeting and pursuing those criminals who pose the greatest risk to the UK. The NCA investigate border vulnerabilities, illegal firearms, cybercrime, fraud, drug trafficking, bribery, corruption and sanctions evasion, organised immigration crime, money laundering and illicit finance, modern slavery and human trafficking, kidnap and extortion, and child sexual abuse and extortion and exploitation. The Border Force is a law enforcement command within the Home Office. Border Force secures the border and promotes national prosperity by facilitating legitimate movement of individuals and goods, while preventing those that would cause harm to the UK from entering. They are responsible for checking the immigration status of people arriving and departing the UK, searching baggage, vehicles and cargo for illicit goods or illegal immigrants, patrolling the UK coastline and searching vessels, gathering evidence, and alerting the police and security services to people of interest. At this point, it's maybe worth noting that Border Force are the agency that has seagoing vessels that can intercept other vessels offshore. When it comes to people trafficking, it is highly unlikely that people traffickers will use offshore renewable energy installations as dropping off points for illegal immigrants to the UK. And if you find anyone on or clinging to an array, it is more likely the array is being used as a place of safety due to a migrant boat sinking nearby. In these circumstances, you should rescue, contact the MCA and the police. Stowaways, on the other hand, when a stowaway is detected, it is the duty of a master to inform the flag state of his vessel, the next port of call, port authorities of embarkation for stowaways, etc. To establish identity and nationality of the stowaway, to take appropriate actions to ensure the general health, welfare and safety of the stowaway until deportation. Inform the authorities, for example, the Coast Guard and the police, who will liaise with Border Force to instigate an appropriate response. Another issue that may be highlighted at this point is stowaways have, because they're beginning to be deterred from entering the UK from France, they have moved along the coast to Belgium. And the picture you saw earlier was a number of people trafficking incident, which was designed by organised crime gangs to take people into the United Kingdom. It was an intelligence-based incident and was operated solely by the Border Force, the National Crime Agency, and the Immigration Investigation Force. Then move to substances, which is a more common find that you will get on an installation. Some background to it: employers have a legal duty to protect employees' health, safety and welfare. And understanding the signs of drug and alcohol misuse or abuse will help you manage health and safety risk in your workplace. Develop a policy to deal with drug and alcohol related problems and to support your employees. Consider the warning signs which could indicate drug or alcohol misuse. Unexplained or frequent absences from work, a change in behaviour, unexplained dips in productivity, more accidents or near misses, performance or conduct issues. You also need to consider that these are also signs of other things like stress or illness, and you don't necessarily have to jump to the first conclusion. It is a safety critical work situation. Drug or alcohol misuse could have a serious outcome. For example, using machinery, using electrical equipment or ladders, driving or operating heavy lifting equipment. The relevant UK legislation, the police will apply the following legislation where relevant: the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 and the Road Traffic Act 1988. Now I concede that the latter, the Road Traffic Act, will never be used in an offshore incident, but that's where legislation for the police exists. Some research done in 2017 by an offshore medical provider concluded 1 in 12 adults in the United Kingdom used an illicit drug in the previous 12 months. And by correlation, you would expect 1 in 12 offshore workers to abuse controlled drugs. Cannabis and cocaine remain the most popular drugs of choice in the UK. And it's also recognised that the social use of controlled substances is a lifestyle choice. Controlled substances can turn up unexpectedly in the workplace, accommodation, and during crew transportation and transfers. In the event of a suspect drugs or contraband find, the following general principles should always be followed until advice can be taken from the onshore team or the police. You should preserve, isolate, secure, think of evidence, and then detailed actions. The incident scene should be protected from unauthorised entry using staff resources and barrier tape or similar. As large an area as possible should be protected, taking into account the safe running of the installation. The area should be isolated, provided this can be done without compromising the crew's safety, and it is not critical to the ongoing operation of the installation. Ensure the area is secure. For example, use your staff to maintain a watch at areas where others could enter the scene. Treat any incident scene with the utmost importance and keep an incident logbook. This will allow you to detail the course of action you may have decided upon. Depending on the nature and scale of the incident and the circumstances of the find, the police may attend the installation to carry out an investigation. Alternatively, the matter may be dealt with from onshore. In any case, you should consider the following actions. Contact your company onshore incident response team or duty manager and provide as much information as possible so they can make contact with the police. Maintain an incident logbook, and then, subject to advice from the police, photograph the drugs or contraband, bag, contain the drugs and place them in a secure place. Establish an audit trail with a written book, especially if the drugs are transported onshore. And when your substance cannot readily be identified as a controlled drug, where the possession of a substance does not constitute an offence, for example, follow your company's substance misuse policy for testing and identifying the substance, but maintain an evidence chain. If the substance is not readily identifiable, secure evidence and follow your company's policy to get the substance analysed. Again, maintain the evidence chain, as this will be vital should the police become involved after the substance is identified. And when we speak about an evidence chain, we mean recording who has taken possession of the item, who it has been passed to, all the way along the chain until the substance is identified. Here is a specimen log for you to consider. An incident log should be maintained for all incidents. This provides the ability to produce accurate and concurrent records of an incident as evidence in the event of a post-incident investigation. The specific incident logbook should be kept and should be separate from any routine log that you may use. We now move to weapons, and specifically edged weapons. An edged weapon is anything that can be used to stab or slash. They fall into three categories. Knives, all other edged weapons that are not knives, but are manufactured or designed to be edged instruments such as axes, swords, scissors, darts, razors, etc. And items that are not manufactured or intended for use as edged instruments. For example, screwdrivers, pens, pencils, pieces of glass, etc. What should you do if you find an edged weapon? The considerations are exactly the same as highlighted earlier in the presentation. Preserve, isolate, secure, evidence, log, etc. To consider why people carry edged weapons, they're easily obtained, they're easily concealed, not too difficult to explain away, easy to use and require no expertise, and are devastatingly effective. If you find a firearm, on the other hand, do not touch it or pick it up. It may be unsafe. And again, preserve, isolate, secure, evidence log, etc. Ensure no one touches the firearm and immediately contact the authorities and your onshore team. If you are faced with a person presenting a weapon, in the likely event that an armed assailant is aboard your installation or vessel, if you can't evacuate, the next best option is to hide in a place where the armed intruder is not likely to find you. The place you choose to hide should be out of view, provide protection if shots are fired in your direction. Should not trap you or restrict your options for movement. When hiding, be sure to do the following. Lock all doors, blockade the door with heavy furniture, silence your radio and or pager, turn off any other source of noise such as a radio or television, hide behind large items, remain quiet and calm, contact your onshore team, alert your onshore team who will contact the police. If you cannot speak, just leave the line open for the operator to listen in. If these options are not available, finally, and only as an absolute last resort, when evacuation and hiding options are not available and you are in danger, consideration may be given to take action against the armed intruder. However, you should not place yourself or another at risk by trying to tackle the assailant. The use of force may in itself lead to worsening of a situation and can lead to a person's death or numerous deaths or injuries. Force should not be used against an armed intruder unless there is a real and immediate danger of the loss of life or serious injury and no other option is available. Remember, no more force than necessary to achieve the overpowering and restraining of the assailant can be used. Now look at fatalities. The term sudden death means any death as a result of violence, suicide, and unknown circumstances. In practice, a sudden death is regarded as any death which is not preceded by illness, or where illness is apparent but only for a short time prior to death. It is highly likely that any death that occurs offshore would fall under this description. The saving of life is paramount to all other considerations. Where a life is capable of being saved, then this should be the primary consideration. It may be that the medic must take a course of action that may disturb the scene, and as such, the medic must be aware that any interference with the body or its surroundings may also alter the significance to be attached to other evidential items at the scene. If any such action is taken, then it is imperative that the actions and the reasons for such actions are recorded in the incident logbook. Upon notification, remain calm and take note of how the body was discovered, by whom, and exactly when. Contact your company, onshore incident response team, and duty manager. Provide as much information as possible so they can contact the police. The incident scene should be protected from unauthorized entry using available staff resource, barrier tape or similar. As large an area as possible should be protected, taking into account the safe running of the installation. And you should remember that in the United Kingdom, the Reporting of Incidents, Diseases and Dangerous Occurrences Regulation, RIDR 1995, Schedule 6, requires that where any person dies as a result of or in connection with work at an offshore workplace, no person shall disturb the workplace where it happened or tamper with anything in that place before the expiry of 3 clear days after the matter has been notified to the Health and Safety Executive, or the place has been visited by an HSE inspector. Nothing shall prohibit the doing of anything by or with the consent of the HSE inspector, or the doing or anything necessary to secure the safety of the workplace or of any person, plant, or vessel. The area should be isolated, provided this can be done without compromising the crew's safety, and it is not critical to the ongoing operations of the installation. Ensure the area is secure. For example, use your available staff to maintain a watch on areas where others could enter the scene. Where the scene is of a distressing nature, all efforts should be made to prevent crew members viewing the scene. The cabin used by the deceased should also be secured, as should all lockers he or she has access to. Treat any incident scene with the utmost importance and keep an incident logbook. This will allow you to detail the course of action you have decided upon. On their arrival, the police will conduct a detailed examination of the crime scene, and it is therefore essential that the above points are observed. Why have we used the term crime scene? In the UK, in the event of a work-related death, the Crown Prosecution Service, that's the CPS in England and Wales, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service in Scotland, and the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland will consider the terms of Corporate Manslaughter and Corporate Homicide Act of 2007, which covers corporate responsibility. Then, subject to advice, you should restrict access, take immediate measures to preserve the scene and surrounding area by ensuring access to the body and immediate area is restricted, and that a careful record is taken of all persons who have come into contact with it. This may require identifying any individual to act as a guard at the scene. The saving of life will always be paramount. However, if a person has died and cannot be saved, do not disturb notes or any part of the scene. This is particular in the event of a death by hanging. Take appropriate measures to confirm the identity of the subject and that life is extinct or otherwise. Time and person confirming needs to be recorded. Ensure that the logbook is commenced and diligently completed. Try and take note of the scene conditions in the incident logbook, for example. Exact location, whether doors were open or closed, locked or unlocked, the heating was on or off, electrical equipment was on or off, any signs of disturbance, drawers open, etc. Visually and without touching anything. Try and make a list of all known persons who have been at the scene with a brief description of what they were wearing. Do not conduct or allow any search of the scene area, but preserve for law enforcement examination. In the case of obvious serious injury and or loss of bodily fluids, ensure that any person who may have been or is likely to come into contact with it is provided with appropriate protective clothing or receives medical advice. Try and make a note of potential witnesses, etc., cabin mates, last to have seen the subject, etc. In consultation with your onshore team, consider an early internal communication strategy, what to tell the personnel. If the death is witnessed and nothing suspicious has occurred, consideration should be given to moving the deceased to a more suitable area while making sure the remainder of the original scene is preserved. Police advice must be obtained prior to taking this action. One last thing to consider as well before we kind of conclude the presentation is how you manage in the offshore environment personnel to prevent them from putting the information on social media or contacting friends, families on shore. Because the last thing that your company or the police would want to happen, that before the police can notify the next of kin of the incident, that it's out there on social media. So whether you have a Wi-Fi policy that you will switch off the Wi-Fi to prevent this is entirely at your discretion. Thank you for listening to the presentation today. What I will say is most of the content of it was taken from this document that I'm now displaying, which is an OG UK document, which was written specifically with the guidance of Police Scotland and the Offshore Company Security Group of OG UK as guidelines for offshore installation managers in the oil and gas industry. And hopefully the information contained in there is easily transferable to other industries. That document can be obtained from OG UK at a cost, or alternatively, you can always find it on the EPOL website, which is an oil and gas industry forum group, and it's epolgroup.co.uk, and a copy of the document is published in there along with various other guidance documents that you may find of interest. So that brings me to a conclusion, and hopefully you will have the facility now to pose questions as you may wish.
Thank you, Len. That was very interesting, and I for one certainly feel I'm a bit more equipped now. God forbid anything like this should happen to in my industry. But thank you for that. I've got a series of questions that have come in. I'll start with. I'll try to keep the topics grouped together. What would be your advice, Len, on dealing with people in crisis, having a mental health issue, for example?
Right, that's a really good question, and it's one that I inevitably get asked regularly when I'm speaking at offshore installation managers courses in Aberdeen. In 2015, the UK government withdrew the services of the military SAR helicopters and put it out to contract. And Bristow SAR now operate the UK Coast Guard helicopters. Now at that time, that question arose on a couple of occasions. Could the police escort the helicopter crew offshore to ensure safety? Because they were concerned that about 2-3 years previous to that, a Norwegian employee opened a helicopter door at 2,000 feet and committed suicide by jumping from it. We explained to them the reasons why the police cannot do it in the UK, and when we would be able to do something similar. Following that, the Coast Guard set up a working group to look at the issue of people in mental health crisis. What they had found was generally when the offshore industry changed their working patterns from 2 on, 2 off, or 2 on, 3 off, to a 3 on, 3 off rotation, they had a sudden jump of people who, unknown to their companies, who had mental health issues. The 3 weeks caused a lot of problems. So the group, the working group who set up to look at this was a consortium of topside medical doctors from industry, companies themselves, and the Coast Guard. The group then compiled a document which is also available on the EPOL website for anybody to download, and it's guidance to offshore teams on how to deal with people in crisis. A last resort of a person in crisis, because the police recognised onshore that 94% of the time that licensed police negotiators are deployed in the UK, it's not for hostages or people with weapons per se, it's people in crisis, people who want to jump off of bridges or people who climb up buildings and then freeze. And that's most of the work that our negotiators actually do. And again, guidance is provided on that topic for it. The people in crisis part is the document, it is on the EPOL website, starts at the beginning of an incident and will speak a medic or a first aider all the way through the procedure to getting that people ashore and to a place of safety.
Thanks, Len. Couple of questions on a similar topic. What would be your view of taking photographic evidence and perhaps even recording witness statements, as investigations unfold?
Yeah, although it's for an investigation, it's primarily the police function. However, what I would say, if you contact your police force that's covering the area of sea that you may be in, take their advice on the subject. Generally, we have no great issue with that as a company perspective, but what we generally do is if the police are to come offshore or the vessels to come ashore at any point, we would ask that probably, take some photographs in position. The police will take copies of those photographs as well as presenting our own. We would usually ask companies not to take statements of the incident as part of their internal investigation until after the police have taken theirs. Likewise, when the health and safety executive travels to the incident, they work along with the police, and the police note their statements. And at the end of the statement, they ask the HSE representative, does he have any further questions to ask or additional information that he would like? And then the police share that statement with the HSE for their investigation. And that saves people being interviewed on more than one occasion, providing the same information time and time again, which adds to the stress of the incident for them. The health and safety executive, however, will generally contact the person at a later date and then go through the statement again to ensure that they've encapsulated everything that they require.
Thanks for that, Len. Similar question, one's just popped in. Can CCTV footage be used in evidence, or is the crew's consent required?
That's a good point, because generally I would say yes, it's okay to take CC footage. It depends what you are recording though. If you're recording people, you would have to advise them first that you are recording and listen to any objections that they may have. If you explain why you're doing it and why it's necessary, you generally get a buy-in.
Okay, thanks for that, Len. Another question regarding police or police competency, if you like, to go onto offshore sites, whether that's oil and gas or renewable installations. Are you guys trained to visit?
Yeah, I currently in Police Scotland manage the administration of our officers who are trained to go offshore. So presently we have somewhere in the region of 60 police officers who hold their offshore safety certificates, BOSIAT and FOAT. Their offshore medicals and fit to train certificates. So we are cleared to fly offshore by helicopter to offshore installations. We will generally be escorted around an offshore oil and gas installation by a buddy from the offshore response team. And again, if there's any offshore certification that's required to go to certain parts of installation, the OIM arranges it for us. Now, if we were going by vessel, which is fairly infrequent, we don't have any specific training in relation to that, and that relies on the acceptance of the master of the vessel and his permission to travel by vessel offshore. What we have done in the past, though, when in circumstances where a body has been recovered from the sea onto the standby vessel of an offshore installation, we have travelled offshore by helicopter, been transferred to the vessel, and come back, escorting the body ashore by vessel.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. Interesting one here. If a UK-based company is working overseas in Asia, for example, and has a fatality on an overseas work site, but clearly the fatality relates to a British national, what action, if any, would the UK police or health and safety executive be required to undertake?
If you're offshore in international waters, the flag state of the vessel would come into play, and the Merchant Shipping Act and whoever would stand up to that. The UN clause legislation would also, where the duty is upon the flag state to do that investigation. And likewise, the death of a British subject overseas is also the subject of the UK authorities. So whether the police from the UK would travel immediately to that area, I suspect they would. If the Far East has similar legislative safety zones similar to the UK, then the local police may also have an input, but either way there would be liaison between the police in the UK and the police in that area, provided we have a bilateral agreement, in other words, a Geneva Convention membership for that would be the first consideration. Otherwise, the Foreign Commonwealth Office come into play, and we have kind of lots of colleagues internationally. And depending on how the Brexit plan plays out as to whether we're still welcome as members of Interpol, I think will be yes, will be the answer.
Yeah, I've got a question coming on Brexit, but there's one that's popped in as well. Obviously, there's a lot of regulatory authorities that are involved in offshore incidents, including the police, the health and safety executive, the Coast Guard, to name but three. How does the primacy between the three, the offshore regulatory authorities work? Who takes primacy?
Right. If we look at an offshore incident in UK, either the UK continental shelf or the UK res, the first thing that should be happening is you're reporting it to the Coast Guard. Now, if you then divide an offshore incident into 4 stages, I won't use phases because the Coast Guard are a bit precious with their term of phase. If you divide it into 4 sections, the first 2 sections are search and rescue. So quite rightly, the primacy for any search and rescue mission sits with the Coast Guard. At that point, the UK police will also stand up and they will be doing their onshore response to an offshore incident. So for an oil and gas incident, I will be going to work with the oil and gas company within their emergency response room in Aberdeen if it's based there. Likewise, other police forces in the southern North Sea, Humberside and Norfolk, for example, will go to the company's response room if in their area, or arrange for a police officer to attend there, and help them progress and almost dictating sometimes how the policing response will then take place. The police liaison officer, as we call him, or the incident liaison officer, is effectively the interface between the emergency response of the company and the emergency response of the police force and their gold command, silver command, and how that operates. So a lot of time I'll be collecting information at this point. At the point where the Coast Guard then says we have no longer any chance of finding anyone alive, and we have no one injured that needs emergency treatment, we are returning to shore. At that point, an email with specific wording on it is sent by the Coast Guard to the police to say, we are standing down, you now have primacy for this incident. And then the police will take on the primacy for that. Now, interestingly enough, the health and safety executive have actually more power in areas that's not covered by UK legislation in relation to safety zones, policing zones, or whatever, because they've got the extension to the Health and Safety at Work Act that allows them to operate in international areas. So the Coast Guard, the Health and Safety Executive can fill that gap, but generally they work along with the police at the same time as the police to deal with that incident. We will then both speak to the appropriate authority in Scotland, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service, in England and Wales, the Crown Prosecution Service or the coroner, and likewise in Northern Ireland. So we do work together very closely and have tried and tested procedures in place.
Thanks, Len. And a slightly related subject, and again, sorry to mention the dreaded Brexit word, but some installations are clearly outside the 12-mile limit. What are the processes for such places, and is it likely to change post-Brexit?
No, there'll be no changes if you're in the UK res or in the UK continental shelf for oil and gas, because UK legislation exists, as I kind of highlighted earlier, the areas of UK civil law being transferred into those areas and UK criminal law being extended, which gives and the ones that gives the policing powers to actually go off. So what happens is, it's not only when we speak about UK criminal law, that doesn't mean that the police are coming off looking at prosecuting you. What it actually means is you have exactly the same standing as if you were in the UK mainland. You have exactly the same protections in law as you have. So in other words, if people were going to try and board your installation, we have the powers to come and repel them, we have powers to come and arrest them. You have the same standing before UK courts, so the court system can actually deal with anything that it's identified for you.
Thanks, Len. An interesting one, again, and I've been on the receiving end of this one myself. How would information regarding a certain offshore instance be prevented from being released to the media or social media, for example? And if it was released, what would be the police view?
All right. Again, we have a document, and I keep punting this EPOL website. It's a Police Scotland document we've actually published on that website to give specific advice around kind of media response and things like that. The Coast Guard, funnily enough, have come out and said quite openly, if a helicopter is deployed on a SAR mission, because they are publicly funded, they have a duty to be honest to the media about why the SAR helicopters are being dispatched. We have an agreement with them that all they will say is, a search and rescue mission has been launched. We're attending an incident approximately 100, 150 miles or whatever offshore. They won't name the company involved. They won't name the installation, certainly at that point. Because what we have found in the past is two things. People who live near airports where SAR helicopters are based, if they see a SAR helicopter taking off, the first thing they do is phone the local media and say, SAR helicopter's just taken off, do you know why? Or do you want to know why? And secondly, when a SAR helicopter lands on a helipad at an airport, you have exactly the same. They're identified with the HM Coast Guard right along the side, or the oil industry helicopter based in Aberdeen, the search and rescue helicopter, Bond Rescue 1. It also attracts exactly the same attention from the public. So because of that, the Coast Guard made the decision that they would respond to a media request, because the Coast Guard tell us that the media contact them every hour of the day, and at least 6 different media outlets contact them during that hour, asking about incidents. So for that reason. Right then, when it comes to social media, is why we kind of recommend the thought that you might want to turn off any media link offshore and encourage your workforce not to tweet anything or to publish it on Facebook or the rig workers rant is another famous one that we'd consider, because our consideration is that the family, next of kin, do not find out through social media.
Okay, thanks for that, Len. A couple of questions, again, not the most cheerful of subjects, but I'll just ask you to go over it again if you don't mind. Could you just go over the point again about in the event of a fatality, should interviews be carried out first primarily by the police and then a follow-up, etc., by HSE advisor or staff, or can the police interviews be done at a later date?
Generally, no. I mean, the good news for you is we have never dealt with a death in the wind renewable sector. We are fairly comfortable how to deal with them in the oil and gas industry because we have been kind of working along with them for the last 40 years. When you have a death in an area that's covered by UK legislation, the police always have primacy, and we will say, do nothing until you either come ashore with the body in a vessel or we travel offshore and do the inquiry. We will gather everybody together and ensure that we have got a list of people who we need to speak to at that time. So no, you must take second stage in the event of a death and hold off. I mean, you can gather information, but we would ask you not to take formal statements at that time.
Okay, thanks, Lynn. A similar question, which you may have already answered in your questions. What advice could you offer about actually moving a body? Should it stay in sight until it can be seen by the authorities, or should it be moved?
If we divide this into a couple of ideas to throw about. If you've got a person who dies as a result of a crime, in other words, has he been murdered? Did the one punch in the chin cause him to fall and smash his head and subsequently die? Was he stabbed? Anything like that. It's a crime scene and the body must remain in position until the police arrive. We'd ask you to screen the area. Similarly, if the person dies as a consequence of a work-related incident, a death in the workplace, similar advice will probably be given to you that where possible, the body remains. Unless, of course, you move the body for medical intervention. And then if you've moved the body once, the body's been moved. We don't have an issue with that at all. However, when it's a witnessed collapse, somebody has a heart attack after exercise or through medical condition or whatever, it's the one occasion that we ask someone from offshore to actually make contact with the relative police force and ask the question, ask for guidance on what you can do. And we're well versed in giving you that guidance. And generally, if we are satisfied that there is no injury, it was not work related, perhaps it was witnessed when it happened, and you're satisfied that the person is dead, then we will give guidance into it. The other thing I suppose to consider is how you make a declaration of death offshore. Because generally what we say in the oil and gas industry, offshore medics are not qualified to make a declaration of death. And they do it in cooperation with their topside medical doctor, who's actually telling them, you've had 2 rounds of resuscitation, this person's never going to come back to life, cease further attempts at resuscitation and call the death. Now, that's fine. If there has been no consultation with a qualified medical doctor and they've gone through the resuscitation guidance, we would say that person cannot be declared dead and the SAR helicopter should be coming to try and resuscitate. If, however, the SAR medics say this person is dead, they're qualified to make the declaration of death and they will make the call. So that's how it's done. How it would work in the renewables industry with an advanced first aider, I'm not entirely sure. If the advanced first aider had been patched through by the Coast Guard to the
Thank you, Len. Thanks very much. One last question, and I was hoping to do a whole webinar without mentioning COVID, but sadly one's crept in. During the pandemic, is there any procedures or any security protocols, etc., that you would want to see prior to attending a vessel or an offshore installation?
Right. It works in opposite in reality. If we were to go offshore, and it's well rehearsed in exercises, emergency response exercises that we do with oil and gas companies. Each of the oil and gas companies have, through OG UK, got policies for travelling offshore, for their own workforce travelling offshore, their contracted staff working offshore. In the event of an onshore team having to go on offshore for an investigation, which includes the police, the health and safety executive, and anybody else. And what we do generally is we are obliged and agree to follow the company policy. So if they say you can't go offshore until you've had a COVID test and it's got to take 24 hours, then so be it. We would like to get offshore the same day as possible. Some companies are now moving towards the kind of the 20-minute turnaround sort of test. And one or two companies have gone the other way. We're only going to test if you show any signs. So it's whatever the company response is that the police will work to.
Thanks, Len. Okay, I think that concludes the webinar. So on behalf of the committee and the IOSH Offshore Group and everybody who's kindly dialed in today, thank you for a very robust presentation, Len. It's been well received, and I certainly appreciate that. To everybody who has dialed in, thank you so much for your time and efforts. I hope you found the call and the webinar of value, and we hope to bring you more such webinars in the near future. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. And just to remind you, the PDF version of the slides are available for anyone who wants them. Thank you. I am now leaving.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.